Vitalik, Juan, Eli, and Robin Hanson. Thank you. And while they get seated, we've got 2 awards to give out for those who were very attentive. Firstly, whose brain was scanned and was on stage earlier today? Okay, I've got a hand over there. Yes, come on up to the stage and get your gift. All right, the second one I have is whose talk actually spoke about these awesome air quality devices. What was the name of the person whose talk it was? Unbelievable. No. No. Yes. Yes, come up to the stage and grab your device. And on that, we'll get started with our panelists. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, so excited to kick off this panel after such an amazing day and looking forward to have a fun chat. So I want to kick it off with a high-level question also for the people maybe that didn't see the whole day about kind of like what DEAC is in almost like differentiation to some of the other movements that came before it, from effective altruism, accelerationism, like transhumanism, all of those different areas. Maybe Vitalik, you want to kick it off giving kind of like your definition of like almost like which movements also inspired you potentially, and like how you came to some of those ideas with DEAC.
Yeah, so when I was started writing my post on techno-optimism, I think there were a few different things going through my head at the same time, right? One of them was seeing the discourse on techno-optimism, and of course Mark Andreessen had published his famous EAC manifesto about a few months before that, and the debate between that and AI safety people that was like very strong at that time, and also I think just an effort to like even make clear to myself as much as make clear to other people kind of what even like are the principles that I'm like seeking to try to achieve and move toward, and like what is the thing that's like updated to the 21st century that yeah, because at the time crypto I think has been for a long time following these ideas that originally came around in like 2008 and 2013. I think a lot of the core thoughts were based on January 2009 Satoshi or a central bank on brink of second bailout for banks and like all of that stuff, right? And like those ideas were at the time already 15 years old, and they were very different from things that at any like other point in our lives over the last few years like we've actually been concerned about. And so the goal was to try to like actually create an updated philosophy that would bring a lot of those thoughts together to, as well as try to make a more concrete picture of like what kind of productive role crypto could play in this kind of future. And so that's where the post was born. And DEAC itself is basically this attempt to find, I mean, I don't want to just say find a middle ground, because like finding the middle ground is like such a cliche, right? And like the whole concept of like, being the third thing is like so overused that there's like literally, it's like there's this concept of the third way and there's this concept of the third position. And if you look at what they actually mean, they're like almost opposites of each other. I think it's, in this case, an attempt to like integrate the parts of both that make that I think make the most sense, and like basically try to create something that is like very philosophically coherent in its own right, but that still like actually brings the kind of future that we want.
Does anyone of you want to add some perspective on your thoughts?
Well, maybe I'll add that I think in particular the EA-EAC debate created a whole bunch of confusion in the world that I think DEAC is solving. A lot of the EA philosophy initially was extremely accelerationist, was very oriented towards progress and accelerating good positive change. And crucially, EA took on a defensive, a selective acceleration path of their specific technologies that you want to accelerate first. And this is an idea that a lot of people pioneered before EA as well. So these ideas are older. But then EAC specifically took a very strong position on just going all the way, accelerate everything, minimize, just accelerate the path of minimize, what is the right phrase, like minimizing free entropy? Something like this, where it's just like trying to organize, try to let matter and computation go as fast as possible. It's totally fine if AI, grows and obliterates humanity and wants to minimize, reorganize the world in paperclips. And this was a core of this is not like a fringe belief in EAC that was kind of a mistake. It was just a core component. And so a lot of the people that think about EAC don't know that. And so the synthesis between EA and EAC is actually quite large. Like the two communities agree on way more than those communities actually think. And I think of DEAC as a way to leverage a lot of the good parts of those communities, leave that set of disagreements kind of behind, and say there's a tremendous amount of positive outcomes that are possible, but it really does matter which things we get first. And it really does matter how you orient the outcomes. You could orient them towards bad things or good things, and we have agency in that choice. And so to the extent possible, let's try and minimize the bad outcomes. So it's not a try to just accelerate for acceleration's sake, and it's not a, hey, halt all progress sort of perspective, which both of those things are now caricatures of those movements. I'm not trying to say that that's what they mean. And just instead try to find a much more nuanced perspective of finding the right path, accelerate progress, but don't wipe yourself out and kill the species while doing so.
I mean, one brief thing I would also add is that I think the EA versus EAC frame, at least as it existed a year ago, also created the impression that, like, whether it's a hero or a villain, AI and AI developers are like the only main character that matters, and San Francisco is the only city that matters, and like focusing on a really small number of narrow things. And to me, a big part of DEAC is also creating a much bigger tent of people working on all kinds of technologies and all kinds of environments that we've seen present today.
So I think, like, kudos to the EA people, because like this is all a reaction to sort of to something that they kind of kicked off, right? So I think of EA as like very like seriously applied like Oxford utilitarianism, right? Like the work coming out of like Peter Singer and Dirk Parfit, and I do think that it does have a blind spot, which is it's like very top down, and it's very strongly convinced of the truth of utilitarianism as like a moral perspective. And I think like the EAC reaction is like mostly vibes based. It's like it's not similarly rigorous. And I think that DEAC is a much more reasoned reaction to EA based on pluralism and based on the idea of like, okay, maybe like, top-down utilitarianism you use to like decide where to put a bridge or something like that. But in ordinary human life, there's many other values that we need to consider, including the values of freedom and human rights and other things that we wouldn't like brook like a global totalitarian state to like stop a hypothetical risk or something like that. So I see it. I see one of the values of the DEAC response to EA is like, no, let's have a more pluralistic response.
Yeah, what I wonder is almost like as an observation for me is like talking even to a lot of people like that consider themselves EA or like EAC. I think, funnily enough, like a lot of them have more actually like a DEAC position, but it's just like the meme is very polarizing, right? So they're like get stamped as like this extreme safetyist or decels or as this extreme accelerationist. But then if you talk to them, like to a lot of the scientists or researchers or startup people, like they actually have this more like reasonable middle ground position. So I wonder, like, and I think that there's like a strength to the meme and like to the polarization of like EA or EAC that, say, progress studies, DIAC, and like other such movements are missing. Like they're not as like edgy, right? Like they're more reasonable, like almost maybe too reasonable. So I wonder like what your perspective is on this. Also, like, is that also like a risk to take like the synthesis of like two polarizing views, or like basically it's like how to for DIAC and those movements to succeed in that like memetic warfare almost.
So I got my PhD in formal political theory, and that contains this essential contradiction that sort of as a mathematical game theory modelist from STEM, we're all about precision in language and being really clear about what we say. And then this whole world of slogans and teams and all this sort of vague flags is just really hard to navigate. There's a basic fact that every one of these labels is vague. And then it's each sort of pulled and pushed by its members and its opponents to an extreme to be a stark thing that everybody else can criticize easily or understand easily. And then, as Vitalik said, there's always this temptation of saying, well, I'm the reasonable middle. I'm not those crazy extremists. But then the middle is kind of hard to say. So I struggle here to like say what's the precise thing I could endorse with a respectable STEM background and trying to be precise. And I guess the thing I would most come to is the idea that of the D in deaccelerate, that the EA people are often quite willing to be centralized and authoritarian in their recommendations. And the wise recommendation is say, fine, we share your goals, we're going to be careful, but you're invoking some pretty dangerous stuff there. And we think maybe we could do similar things in safer ways. A more decentralized approach is a bit safer because there's the danger of invoking these centers and these authorities, and that's really the thing that, that's kind of what puts off Andreessen, really. He sees them invoking these centrals and he goes, no way, I do not want that at all, and he's trying to take the most extreme position he can to reject that, which then looks kind of silly on the other extreme.
I'm curious, like, we touch obviously on a lot of them throughout the day, but if there's specific areas that you think are most crucial, almost like for differential acceleration and like for DIAC to make progress on, if any one of you want to start on it.
The big one that I think is perhaps most on my mind is neurotechnology. And I think, to me, and I think there's a huge difference in opinion here on how far you think AGI might be or ASI might be. If you have different opinions on the time frame there, then you probably think differently about other technologies. I care about a lot of them, a lot of the ones discussed today. The one that I maybe represent more these days is neurotechnology, because that's the field that is both in its infancy to some degree, has way less energy, way less people and capital, and it's one that I think needs to be accelerated the most from where we currently are in a defensive orientation. So that would be my plug. It's BCI and eventually whole brain emulation as a very large hedge to make sure, hedge is the wrong word, but as a defensive push to make sure that when we do make AGI or ASI type beings, we don't accidentally create a competitive species that wipes humanity out, and instead we have some kind of smooth upgrade or smooth synthesis along the way.
Yeah, I think I'm a big fan of neurotech as well, but one other thing I would highlight is the cyber defense and info defense side of things. And I think there the challenge is basically that like threats that we get on the internet are rapidly becoming much more sophisticated, right? So as basically one big switch that we've seen between like literally 2 years ago and today is that there is basically no longer any reliable way to tell that someone is human just by looking at their pattern of behavior on the internet. And that broke a lot of things, right? And we're seeing all kinds of new types of scams. We're seeing all kinds of like new types of hacks. We're seeing like all kinds of growing cyber attacks, like growing ways to use these technologies politically. And like there is a risk that this basically becomes this frontier of like low-grade war of all against all that constantly risks escalating into a worse kind of war. And to me, the only way of resolving things like this without basically taking the Hobbesian solution, which basically says that there is one small group of experts that all trust each other that decide everything for everyone, is to actually like figure out what is the defense on that side. And there are a lot of like really interesting solutions, right? So like on the cyber side, like there is actually an opportunity to make formally verify a huge number of things that were not formally verified before. There's massive gains in specific types of computer security that have been made. There have been massive gains made on hardware, like more things happen on trusted chips. There's more work on making hardware more secure. There's all of these like new epistemic technologies that are being developed. Like, how do we get to a world with like 5 more things that look like community notes? And like just seeing more experimentation in that space happen at a rate that is fast enough to keep up with the pace of change on the internet feels like it could be extremely good for us and for like our ability as a global civilization to just maintain cohesion as we enter this age of some form of AGI and then superintelligence coming to us.
I agree with all that, and relatedly, I would say authenticated comms. So like, I think one thing that AI is going to be very good at is phishing and, voice cloning and doing calls on the phone. Like our communication systems are not ready for this, right? Like our phone calls are completely like unauthenticated, and our emails, are easily spoofed. And the traditional problem that has plagued this is public key distribution, and blockchains are actually maybe a great mechanism for distributing public keys, and we could have a system where you can be reasonably certain that that you're talking to the right person, even in a world where there's voice cloning. And so I think that would be like something that is a near term, like very practical step, but then also like in a world where we do have maybe a malicious superintelligence, like it wouldn't be able to exploit that vector, right? And so it is both a near-term benefit to build something like that, and also a long-term, safety enhancing.
Like I wonder, almost like cutting to the crux, I think almost like between DIAC and like some of the other movements. Like I would argue that a lot of them like actually share the majority in common. Like they do all love rockets and like bioprogress and progress across every vector. I think it really comes down to an extent AI, and I'm curious if like on your all's perspective, but like I really wonder if, like what the position of DIAC should be, or like is on kind of like on AI development specifically, because I think it's unclear almost like how to navigate it, I think, for a lot of camps, and I wonder if there's because it obviously promises some of like great positives and upsides, but also some potential risks. And obviously both the closed source and the open source paradigm has risks in the centralized or the decentralized approach. So I wonder kind of like if you agree that this is like one of the core differences maybe also between some of those technological movements, or if there's some others where DIAC takes like a different position.
A generation ago, I get to play the old man position here, we had the great nanotech debate, and I think we learned a lesson from that, which was Eric Drexler tried very nicely to call attention to the world to an exciting technology and honestly paint both the upside and the downside, but the net effect was people overwhelmingly looked at the downside and wanted to distance themselves from it and assure everybody that like that couldn't happen and they were just going to lock it down. And there's a plausible case for saying that the world kind of goes okay so far when the world doesn't really know what's coming and they bubble into it and they slowly get used to things. But when they see something a distance away and can describe it abstractly in ways that could, terrify them, they don't react very well. So there's a basic problem here that maybe our world isn't very well set up for hearing ahead of time big things are going to happen. I fear there's the problem that a lot of us who know more about technology in the future, we want to identify with that knowledge and that difference, and we want to really paint the fact that big things are coming soon, and we know about it and other people don't, and hey, you guys, you need to wake up and hear. But the way most people react to that is, oh, if they actually believe you, because mostly they don't, if they actually believe you, they're going to react and say, oh my God, something big's happening, something should be done, someone should be in charge. And that's exactly the problem.
I kind of feel that's different in maybe the last 10 years. I think I agree with a lot of the prior decades definitely operating that way, and to a big degree, some of the AI risk is being taken that way. But I do think in the last 10 years, we've seen the effect of being able to talk about the future actually recruiting a dramatically large contingent of people to help build it and help accelerate the build out of that technology. And so I think these days, I think it took a while for the internet to really percolate through a lot of the world. But nowadays, we are having gatherings like this in Thailand. We are not presently in a room in Silicon Valley talking about the future. We are now in being able to gather people around the world on a range of components. And so I think we have gotten the ability to marshal resources around the world well. There is a risk of scaring people and causing unnecessary or bad slowdowns. I guess, but at the same time, there's also risks to take into account. So I think to like Vincent's prompt, I think a lot of people's positions will really center on what they think will be the timelines on AI development and how quickly we'll achieve some things, because some of the things that you might try to achieve will feel not relevant to you in a short enough time frame to have enough of an impact. Now, I tend to take a very conservative position here in terms of broadly you should let as many parties as possible accelerate the range of things that they think, because there's knowledge is not evenly distributed and is not equally distributed to everybody. So different people will be able to spot really valuable components, and you should have a broad rights protecting system that lets people accelerate the things that they think are valuable. But I do think, at least for a set of us, to your AI specific question, I do think doing something about that differentially would be valuable, though I do very much agree that you cannot quite slow it down, and it's actually potentially even more dangerous to slow it down.
Yeah, I think I'll step out of the kumbaya a little bit and answer the original question, which is what is a crux between EAC and DEAC. I would say DEAC is much more explicitly uncomfortable with acceleration of a type where the consequence of the acceleration is that one thing gets 51% of all of the power of human civilization. And regardless of whether that thing is a nation state or a AI philosopher god trying to implement a pivotal act, which was one of the EA theories, or the first corporation that happens to figure out how to unlock the next scaling law. To get more concrete, I think the way that OpenAI originally started as this effort that basically said that there are all these big corporations that are doing closed AI, and so we need something that is open as an alternative to make sure that these benefits widely reach all of humanity. And then, of course, as we know, 4 years later they sacrificed openness for the sake of safety, and then 4 years after that they sacrificed safety for the sake of growing and getting even bigger. And honestly, that scares me. That's one explicit difference for me.
I'll take maybe just a really agnostic approach. I think I don't put a lot of credibility in any of these forecasts, right? I think that even the experts, right? You said people, lay people don't know what's coming, but even the experts are bad at predicting the effects of technology. And if you think about, I think about very often the Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace, this document from 1996, John Perry Barlow, founder of EFF, also lyricist for the Grateful Dead. And he thought he knew what was coming, which is that governments of flesh and steel were going to be obsolete, and we were going to create a society of mind in cyberspace. And if I look at the internet today, I don't see a society of mind. And tell the people of Ukraine that governments of flesh and steel are irrelevant. It's not, right? And so even the experts don't know. My bias is the physical world still matters, not just the digital world. And I do think, like if AI follows the pattern of the internet, it's going to be incredibly significant, maybe more significant. But a lot of that significance might be cultural or not in sort of the physical. Like the physical world might be more complex than a lot of people predict, and it may be hard for AI to affect it as much as we think it's going to.
Let me agree with Eli so much he might disagree with me. If you look at, say, billion-dollar projects or $10 billion projects, they just consistently seem to go badly. And if you look at the history of regulation, I'd say the best regulations and regimes are ones where you're responding to pretty specific problems with a pretty known context, and you have something that responds to that. And then, if things change, you change that. And the worst cases in history, like things like nuclear power or even genetic engineering, are where you're responding to a pretty abstract concern that hasn't been very much realized, and people sort of make an abstract response to it that isn't, adapted to a particular context or how the problems that are realized. And that, I think the lesson there is that we overestimate our ability to see and plan these things. And yes, you might envision various AI terrors, but honestly, so far, hardly anything has happened. Let's emphasize this. Hardly anybody has been hurt at all by AI, and we're not even close to anybody being hurt anytime soon by AI. So I would say, hold your concerns, watch for things, but wait till you see some actual harm in a concrete context, and then we'll listen to your concerns about what we should do about that.
But that's not a good way to avoid falling off cliffs.
Well, if you have some light in front of you and
Yeah.
if you get a few feet to the cliff, you could stop.
And I think it's precisely what we're talking about. I think a few of us think that we see the edge of the cliff and we're trying to avoid the edge of the cliff. And this is not going to smoothly follow some slope. There can be a very dramatic drop. And I think that's what's fueling a lot of the concern. So if we take your analogy of just wait until there's a bunch of damage, I think that's true up to a point, but I think a lot of people argue that may very well be way too late. By the time you see substantial damage, it might be way too hard to recover. I'm not necessarily in full agreement with that point, but I think with a lot of people trying to selectively accelerate other things or decelerate AI would take that position.
In the history of technology, we just haven't seen cliffs of that sort. That's maybe on
nuclear weapons
territory, like driving across a terrain, you might come across a cliff, but that's even really rare.
Nuclear weapons, we blew up 2, and then we tested a bunch, and we said no more, and they cannot be used in war. And I think today we are in a much better position because of that.
And we said a whole bunch of things could go wrong if we made nuclear power, and we made sure to stop those, and we sort of killed the whole damn industry.
Yeah, I very much agree with you on that part. Yeah, for sure.
Right. So I guess the question is, would the world be better or worse if anyone could buy both a nuclear power plant and a nuke at Walmart?
Plant and the...
But even the nuclear weapons was a response to an actually observed thing. Nuclear bombs actually went off, and we had a sense of how big they were and how expensive and how heavy, and a whole bunch of details about nuclear weapons that we could respond to in regulating nuclear weapons. They weren't an abstract, hypothetical thing that might happen in 20 years.
To wrap things up, I would love to tie it all back to Devcon, to Ethereum and crypto. And I'm very curious, I think the audience is largely builders in crypto, if I'm not mistaken, a big chunk of people in the space. And I wonder the specific advice to the audience of Devcon, to builders in crypto, how they can differentially accelerate, how they contribute in a DX way to improve the world. Curious for any.
I mean, one very practical answer is that crypto is just like a very high-value test bed for cyber and info defense technologies in very obvious ways of which we're very aware. And I think helping people better solve those problems, this has always been one of my hopes, can actually be a bridge to building those technologies that could then be helpful to people in many other environments.
Yeah, hopefully prediction markets can help us get better
Hopefully.
timelines on any risk, on any upside, and help us with those questions.
Yeah, the probability of a cliff we'll have.
Was SBF a cliff?
Awesome.
I was gonna plug some other ideas. So look, find the field and technology that you think you are passionate about and know a lot about, and you think will most impact the future. And in whatever you do, try to aim for good outcomes. At the end of the day, it's the people that are building things that end up writing a lot of how these technologies end up impacting billions of people in the world. So the values that you imbue into the technology that you build have a huge impact in the future. And so today we're massive beneficiaries of the values of the people that built the internet and built the web and build so much of what we use day to day. So as we go and accelerate some technology, imbue it with good values to end up with safe outcomes and the best benefit to as many beings as possible. Though I do agree with utilitarianism is probably not the right moral philosophy for the future. But overall, try to do good things and try to be conscious of where the bad parts might be and avoid those.
Awesome.
Thank
Really
you.
nice ending. Thanks everyone for coming.